All right, well, I want to welcome everyone today to this webinar to discuss the future of cybersecurity and cyber law and careers, most importantly, in this space. I am Julie DiBlasio. I'm the Director of Graduate Studies here at CSU's Cleveland Marshall College of Law. And I can see on the attendee list that I have had the distinct pleasure to speak with all of you as you're thinking about this Master of Legal Studies in Cybersecurity and Data Privacy. And we, of course, hope today that this webinar will help you in that decision one way or another. We are so fortunate to have both Professor Brian Ray and Professor Jeffrey Biller with us, both of whom teach in the program. Brian, that looks great. So I think we're on our way. But I want to introduce Professor Brian Ray, who will, of course, then introduce our special guest, Jeffrey Biller. But Brian co-founded and directs the Center for Cybersecurity and Privacy Protection at Cleveland Marshall College of Law. He teaches in this program the Master of Legal Studies in Cybersecurity and Data Privacy. He founded this program. I know I always embarrass him, but I like to, because every single time that a new student goes through the program and takes Brian's course, because he's one of the first courses you will take, they have a wonderful experience. They truly enjoy all of the knowledge, expertise, fun, and supportiveness that Brian brings to the class and the program. So it is my honor to pass it off to Brian to introduce our special guest and kick off the webinar. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Julie, for that very kind introduction. It is a great program. As Julie said, I created it, and so it's my baby, and so I really enjoy getting to know the students. We're really pleased to have with us today another faculty member in the program, Jeff Biller. Jeff is has extraordinary experience in a side of cybersecurity that a lot of programs don't emphasize, which is national security, defense, and international law. We're really lucky that Jeff's able to share his time. He's a full-time professor at the United States Air Force Academy, where, as you can see from his title, he is in the cyber law department with CyberWorks. I love the fact that the Air Force Academy has adopted a kind of startup name for the cybersecurity piece of what they do. But Jeff has extensive experience operationally. He was part of Cyber Command as part of the United States Air Force Academy, and he continues to do research and teach in these areas. And we met a while back. We were on a panel together out in Colorado, and we were putting this program together. And I said to him, hey, there's no way you could teach for us, is there? And he said, well, let me check. And it turns out he does have that flexibility. So we're really lucky that we're able to add that kind of expertise to the program. And that's one of the things that we're going to focus on today is how that piece of cybersecurity, why it's important, and what Jeff covers in his course, as well as the kinds of careers that you might think about pursuing where those topics come up. So with that, I am going to pivot out and stop sharing. And we're going to start talking with Jeff. So what we'll do is we'll spend 15-20 minutes chatting with Jeff. Please feel free to drop into the Q&A any questions that you've got, or if you want to jump in and say something, and Julie, you'll be monitoring that for us. Go ahead and raise your hand, and we're happy to turn your let you participate in the conversation if you want to ask something directly as opposed to putting in the text. And then we'll pause for questions once Jeff and I finish chatting, and then we'll give you a quick overview of the curriculum and some of the details on how to apply if you're interested. So with that, Jeff, how did you get started in cybersecurity?
That's a good story. So a little bit of my history. So when I was initially an officer in the Air Force, many years ago, I started out as an intelligence officer, not as a lawyer. But a big part of being an intelligence officer, particularly in the military and the Air Force, is learning about signals intelligence. And so on the intelligence side, a lot of the kind of cyber issues. Now, when I first started, cyber was definitely a thing, and it was something we thought about, but it was still a bit in its infancy. So we still mostly thought about cyber issues through the lens of signals intelligence. And then on the other side, it was kind of a complete and total break between the intelligence side and the network operations side. And the two didn't really mix at all. So eventually the Air Force sent me through law school. And most young lawyers in the military start off as prosecutors, and I did the same. But I ended up prosecuting a number of computer crimes cases. And I just really enjoyed that aspect, the kind of learning about the technical aspect and how they do the forensics and the investigations, kind of combined with the legal prosecutorial side. And so as I developed in my career, I had an opportunity to go back to get an additional legal degree. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called the LLM. It's kind of like a academic master's in a particular area of law that, at least in the United States, you actually do after your JD. And so I asked if I could do a program that focused on cyber law and cybersecurity. So they actually sent me to George Washington University out in DC to get that degree. And that's where it kind of cemented the rest of my career working in the areas of cybersecurity and different aspects of cyberspace. Now, that degree was a great degree, and there were some really intelligent people. One of my professors and mentors was a guy named Oren Kerr there, who he now teaches out at Berkeley, and he's one of the top guys when it comes to Fourth Amendment and cybersecurity and cyber crimes. So I learned a lot there, but what I didn't get there was kind of the technical side. And so when I left that program and started doing cybersecurity law full time and working for organizations like Cyber Command and our intelligence agencies working in the cyberspace, what I lacked was the technical understanding. So I really had to pick that up on my own, just by working together with the operators, with the software developers, to try and understand the things that I was advising on. And it took a number of years to really feel fully comfortable and advising in that arena, given kind of, I did not have that computer science technical background in the area, which, as I'm sure we'll get to in a minute, is one of the reasons why I think your program is so fantastic and what really drew me to it when you first asked me to come on board, and I saw that was an integral part of the program, because I do think it's very important. So one of the great things about working in cyber law in the military is that we run the complete gamut of advice. The Department of Defense runs the largest computer network in the world, the Department of Defense Information Network. And so much of what you do is just on the basic network operation side. So what's the law governing the setting up, the running of networks, particularly within the government. But then we also do the defensive side, right? So cybersecurity and cyber defense, what are the laws governing there? And then we also do the offensive side, right? Through US Cyber Command, when we want to levy some sort of cyber effect against an adversary, and what's the law governing there? So as well as the intelligence piece, which has a whole different set of rules that apply to it. So one of the things that was daunting, but that I really loved about doing cybersecurity and cyber law in the Air Force, was that I got to see the entire range, from law enforcement to national security investigations, to network operations, to intelligence operations, to offensive operations, and advise on that entire range. And I loved it. I ended up teaching for my last career in the Air Force out at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. So I taught courses in space law and cyber law for them. And I just wanted to keep going with the academic piece. I love the teaching and the research aspect of it. So I retired and was fortunate enough to find a job teaching in cyber law and political science and the policy around cybersecurity out here at the Air Force Academy, which, as you mentioned, was where I met you. So that was kind of the career arc that brought me where I am today. I was very fortunate to really be in some wonderful assignments where I got to see so many different aspects of the field. I got to work in all the privacy aspects and in all the executive orders and laws governing cybersecurity and international law. And so I hope that I can bring a little bit of that knowledge and experience to the program.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, as we talked about when we brought you on, it's still a gap on the JD side, although we're starting to let some JD students into your your program. But it's, it's a fascinating area because it's where the sort of rubber hits the road in a lot of ways, right? Cybercrime almost always at least has some connection to indirectly or directly to state actors. Insurance claims sometimes get involved in the active war exception, trying to figure that out. And so having that understanding of sort of how, you wouldn't think as a civilian operator, whether on the legal side or compliance of the technical side, that you're dealing with international law, but of course you are. And then as you mentioned, on the offensive side, a lot of companies are eager to follow the trail, and they're really interesting legal issues involved there. And then, as you mentioned at the top, traditional law school programs in this area focus on the privacy side of things, and that's an important part. And Fourth Amendment sort of sits out there and plays some important roles. But when you're talking about operational privacy and security especially, you're really operating outside of constitutional law, because those limits, are few and far between, and they shape some things, but they're not really involved in the operation. Increasingly, even on the privacy side, because of the new laws that are coming out.
One thing, what I always found as practicing initially, you have no idea what the threat is, right? It could be anything from some 18-year-old kid in his basement to a nation state actor. And you have to keep all of your options open and kind of understand the full range of potential responses depending upon the threat actor. Is this something you need to just bring in local law enforcement? Do you need to contact the FBI? Do you need to contact the National Security Agency, the DHS? Because initially you generally don't know. You just know that something is wrong with your network. It appears to be a malicious actor. And that's about the extent of your knowledge generally at the beginning.
Yeah. And, actually, I was just in a conversation yesterday with the CISO, and he's the global privacy compliance officer, is the title Goodyear has with Goodyear. They're part of the Northeast Ohio Cyber Consortium. We're in a part of a long-term project talking with those kind of folks to find out what we can add to the program so that folks are more appealing as graduates there. And that's one of the things they both said. The privacy compliance folk actually said it first. He said, what I really want, he actually used the example. So I'd love to have a student who had done a soup to nuts incident response, everything from starting with there's been some kind of an incident, figuring out who the threat actor is, up to reporting and who might sue or investigate us. And we pieces of that, and we're thinking about expanding that. But as you say, what you do sort of fills that gap around, who are the authorities that might need to get involved or who might be helpful in the response. So with that, let's turn a little bit more specifically to your course. And as I mentioned before, I think we had one other person join us. Please feel free to either throw questions in the Q&A or raise your hand. We're happy to bring you into the conversation if you've got questions for Jeff about really anything, the program or his background or the kinds of work that folks might do relating to what he does. But the course itself, Jeff, so tell us about that. I know you based it on a course that you teach at United States Air Force Academy, but give us sort of the overall arc. What are the topics that you cover, and what are the kinds of things students are going to see?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the challenges here is, cyber law there are so many different areas you could go. There's no way to bring it all into a single group,
right.
Because we don't get as much into some issues such as copyright law, which you certainly could, right? Which is an important area of the practice of cyber law. We don't get as much into, we touch upon a little bit, but issues such as Section 230 and speech on the internet and liability for defamation on the internet, some of these areas. So our class is a little more security focused, right? And so I usually start out with a little bit of just discussion of what are our big picture goals as the United States when it comes to cybersecurity, not just the government, but the United States in general. And so we look at a number of different strategy documents. We look at some threat reports just to kind of ground our feet, because I think it's important as you go through the law and you look at the law to make sure that and ask the question of, is it filling what our strategy is trying to do when it comes to cyberspace? Is the law serving a purpose, or is maybe the law not running in lockstep with what our strategy are? So I just think that helps set the groundwork. So we usually start there and then move into more of a traditional law enforcement, computer crimes, question of jurisdiction, right? That's a huge issue in cyberspace because of the dispersed nature of it and the remote nature of it. Trying to understand, well, how would you even figure out who has jurisdiction over an issue? And what are the particular crimes that govern, particularly the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is our primary anti-hacking statute, and for the federal government. And most states have an anti-hacking statute that's mirrored off of or based off of the federal statute.
Right.
So then we look at investigations in cyberspace. So if you are advising either a company, right, who is the government is seeking information from them for an investigation, or if you are advising law enforcement themselves, what are the rules that govern when you need to reach out and get data or conduct surveillance in cyberspace? And there's a number of blocks that we spend there because it's fairly complicated, that area of the law.
Right.
And this crosses over with your privacy questions. Absolutely right. It's very much privacy issues. It's a lot of Fourth Amendment. It's Fifth Amendment. It's the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. And so that's what really governs how law enforcement and the companies that they rely on. So if you're with an ISP and law enforcement comes and says, we need this data, you need to understand what the law is governing, how they are able to access that data. And when we kind of wrap up with traditional law enforcement, then we move a little more into the national security realm, because there's some very big differences in how you conduct investigations that have a national security purpose as opposed to a more traditional law enforcement purpose, right? So if somebody is committing a crime just to try and get money versus, right, I'm doing something because I want to spy or do some sort of national security related offense against the United States. And the laws are very different that cover those, but they're related. So I think it's important to do those back to back so that you can compare and contrast, right? So I work for Verizon and I get a subpoena that's based upon traditional crimes versus I get a court order that's based upon national security. What's the difference there, and how should I evaluate those? And then we move more into the kind of this is an area that crosses over a little bit between law and policy. But when it comes to government cybersecurity and the government organizations such as CISA, who is the I'm having a bit of a brain fart here. The Cyber Infrastructure and Security Agency. Right.
I always forget too.
So they're the primary federal agency that governs cybersecurity, particularly over critical infrastructure in the United States. So it's important to understand what their role is. So if you have an incident, particularly if it's a larger incident, you're almost certain to bring in CISA, you're almost certain to bring in some law enforcement agency, potentially the FBI. You might have to deal with one of the intelligence agencies, depending upon the type of threat, such as the National Security Agency. And so it's important to understand that government structure and how the government, when they need to get involved in incident response, what are the laws governing and what are the agencies responsible for doing incident response in the cybersecurity area, right? So you've got a major breach on your network. And it's something that you immediately recognize, and it's going to need to be reported up, and you are probably going to need to bring in outside agencies. What are their roles, and what are the rules governing how they will support and handle that particular investigation? And then the last phase, we kind of move on to international law. So when it comes to relationships between state actors, right? So if this is a North Korean government hack against the United States or a Chinese intelligence intrusion into your network, what are the rules that govern that? How can you respond? Like you mentioned before, a lot of companies would like to take response actions, but once we start dealing with other nation state actors, the US government gets a little nervous about private actors. conducting operations. So you need to understand what those rules are, and then how you're going to interact with the government, with the U.S. government, because they're going to want to be directing that interaction between the breach on your network, if it's being done by a state actor, or even, for example, a Russian ransomware gang, right? What are the implications of taking response actions against an actor that's outside the United States? So that's basically the course. Like I mentioned, there's lots of issues that we just don't have time to cover that I would love to, but that's partially why we have regular Zoom sessions. So that if there's something comes up in the news, it's a prominent issue, or if a student is really interested in a particular area that we're not covering, then we have a chance to cover some of those issues as well, that aren't covered in the recorded sessions, but we can do in the live Zoom session.
Yeah, and just as an aside, that's how we structure all the courses. Well, most of them. Legal writing sometimes doesn't have as many of those Zoom sessions. Most of the courses have at least 3 to 4, and I know, Jeff, yours is weekly almost, right?
Yeah, right now we're doing them weekly. Yeah,
which is nice, because unlike many online programs, you really do get to know the professors. And in case you're getting a little overwhelmed by Jeff covers a lot, as I'll explain when we pivot back to our own introduction deck and I talk about the curriculum, we set you up nicely for that. In particular with my course, that's a survey, introduces the sort of baseline for a lot of these topics. But there's really not a lot of courses out there like Jeff's that cover that integrated waterfront of, I mean, these are exactly all the things that come up. Doesn't matter whether you're in-house, doesn't matter whether you're in a technical role or a compliance role, or you're outside counsel in an outside advisor role, forensics, or if you're working in one of these government entities. These are the issues where everything kind of comes together when you have an incident. So it really isn't a nice course for us, because a lot of our other courses are looking at kind of discrete legal topics or how to put together programs operationally. This is sort of what happens. What are all the things you need to be thinking about that could come up as a result of an incident or as you're planning for one. So again, if there's questions, throw them in the chat or raise your hand. Last topic we want to cover, and then we'll get into the curriculum a little bit more, is careers in this area, Jeff. So you're a lawyer, I'm a lawyer. Most of the students in this program are not lawyers, though we do get a decent number, and often you'll have JD students, that's the law students in the classes, because we're sometimes sharing these courses. What are the kinds of roles that folks who aren't going to get a law degree but are interested in this area that touch on the stuff you've been talking about, that you see as professionals?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned this before, but yeah, on most of these issues that we're talking about on a day-to-day basis are not handled by the lawyers, right? Mm-hmm. The lawyers get called in typically when there's something highly unusual, there's a huge breach, right? And they need to make a call about, right, at what point is this required to be reported up, questions like that. But on a day-to-day basis, right, when you get that subpoena from a court for a particular set of information, or right, you're advising on a law enforcement officer on putting together a warrant for some sort of electronic surveillance in cyberspace, those issues on a day-to-day basis are generally not handled by the lawyers, right? Those are handled by the operators in the field because they come up fairly regularly. So, if you, you might be working, as you mentioned before, in compliance, or you might just be an operator who's the person who handles these requests when they come in, or you might be a privacy officer for a company. So these are all jobs that you don't need to be a lawyer for. Generally, you have that in-house counsel or maybe outside counsel for when you get a particularly complicated or a very important issue that you want to make sure is handled in a detailed sort of a way. And these can come up right from right? Maybe I'm working for a big ISP like Verizon, or maybe I'm just working for a small company, because every company now handles data, right? Every company has to take in consumer data and store it, and they're using it for different reasons, and they need to know what the guidelines are for protecting and governing that data. So, right, you might just be a network operator or a salesperson, or who knows, right? For a small company, anybody that's interacting with customers and receiving data is going to need to understand some of the laws that govern that data. But like you said, it can go all the way up to now I'm working for Verizon, and I'm the person actually interfacing with law enforcement when they're coming to us with requests. And the law there. Or maybe you are a law enforcement agent, right? Or somebody working in government, and you're the person who has to handle making those requests. So it's really quite broad. I mean, there's almost no area of industry or government now that doesn't need to understand some of these rules governing data privacy, governing cybersecurity, and the interaction between private industry and government.
Yeah, and again, a lot of what you're saying is echoing that conversation I had yesterday with the senior leadership at Goodyear. That the global privacy compliance officer said, we asked him, so what do you look for in hires, non-lawyer hires? And he said the hardest skill set to have is someone that can do that translation, right? That is comfortable enough with the legal and often the contractual dimensions, because more often than not, these questions for a company like Goodyear are as much contract based as they are statutory or regulatory based. And then being able to talk to the tech folks, and then have enough technical knowledge, as he said, that you've got a BS meter, so that like you when they're just sort of obfuscating, and vice versa, right? And then being able to take what they're saying back to the legal or business side, and be able to say with some confidence about what hey, this is what's going on, or in tandem with the tech person, do that translation. And
cybersecurity is a jargon heavy industry.
Yeah.
So unless you can, like you just said, can translate and be able to understand what they're saying, it's really hard to recognize when there's an issue and when something's not right, if you can't understand what they're talking about.
And you got to get out of your silo, because you can write a privacy policy, but you can't really enforce it or understand whether it's being enforced in a helpful way, unless you really understand how those data structures are working. And especially with incident response, like that's, as you said, the main call is, okay, is there a reportable breach? And that definition varies across jurisdictions, and it's ultimately a technical question about what has been accessed or exfiltrated, or sometimes, I was actually, one of the things that they mentioned at the top of the call is apparently India has a new regulation out that defines reportable incidences as basically almost anything. And they're trying to figure out, what is there any insight as to, there's no way that the government of India actually wants to get your logs, like every single anomalous activity that that's getting reported out. But that's the letter of the law seems to suggest that could be the scope. And I haven't had a chance to look at it, but anyway, that kind of translation, somebody's going to have to do that translation. Figure out, no, what we really mean is, it doesn't have to be, this much of, this much activity or this kind of activity. Anyways, there'll be a translation issue going on. So with that, I'm going to once more, I think Jeff will hang on with us as we go into the curriculum in case there are questions, but want to give you folks who are on the line one more chance to ask him anything directly about either his class, what he does, these kinds of questions, going once, going twice. Okay.
Yeah, take this opportunity if you have a question.
Yeah, it's not off well, if you take the program, you'll have a chance to spend a semester with Jeff, but
that's true.
For now, yeah.
Lucky.
Okay. Yeah.
Very lucky.
So with that, I'm gonna continue. I'm gonna share my screen again and walk you through the curriculum, and then I'll hand it back Julie to wrap things up. So play from, there we go. All right. So as Jeff mentioned, and one of the things that appealed to him about this program that he would have liked to have had, even with all his experience, as he started to get into operational cybersecurity, our program is designed to give you what we call the 360 degree of cybersecurity and data privacy. We have a strong technical core that starts with Cybersecurity 1, flows through Cybersecurity 2, and then ends with the technical capstone. 2 of those courses are taught and created by Spence Witten, who is fantastic at getting folks with no technical background up to speed on cybersecurity. Cybersecurity 1, he gets you quickly into actually using tools that that are used by both white hat hackers and sometimes by malicious actors. So you get a really hands-on understanding of how these processes work. And along the way, he's teaching you about all these things we just talked about that you need to know to be able to talk to technical people. If you're already in a technical role, but not a cybersecurity role, these are useful courses to get you that specific cybersecurity knowledge. If you are already part of a cybersecurity team, we've had several professionals like that go through the program. And so far, all of them have said it's a nice refresher for them, but we're also open to talking with you and trying to tweak the program. So you can start with, say, Cybersecurity 2 and skip Cybersecurity 1. And likewise, then on the legal side, we start with Introduction to American Law, which is the course that I created and teach, which gives you that very solid grounding so that you're able to handle the more sophisticated content in courses like Jeff's. We do it's a survey of all of the major topics you would take as a first-year law student, as well as upper-level advanced topics that you encounter regularly in cybersecurity. So constitutional law, administrative regulatory law, we get into criminal law, and you'll learn about that major law that Jeff mentioned that essentially governs most computer crimes, and then some advanced topics around surveillance and other things towards the end. So that gets you quickly up to speed into the legal side. That is paired then with legal writing, which you'll take at some point after Introduction to American Law, where you'll get more into the weeds of how to both consume and produce legal materials, because that's one of the main things in that translation role. If you're on the compliance side, that is the bread and butter of what you're doing. You are implementing the regulatory guidance and the legal and the laws that are in these areas. And if you're on the technical side, in order to be able to have that conversation with the legal and business side, it's important for you to be able to confidently be able to say, look, I understand the law. I'm not the lawyer, but I understand what we're talking about. And that gives me the confidence to be able to say, yeah, what I'm seeing on the technical side, is likely or isn't likely to qualify as, say, a breach or to be subject to some of these privacy laws. So those are the foundations there. And then the rest of the program has courses like Jeff's that go deeper into the topics that you will encounter as a cybersecurity professional, regardless of whether you're in a technical or compliance or a business role. Corporate compliance 1 and 2, compliance is a big piece. Again, either you're dealing with it as a technical professional or you're dealing with it as a law-related professional. And so corporate compliance 1 and 2 give you that overview of how cybersecurity and privacy fit into a broader compliance program. And this is a huge and ever-growing field, and a field in which cybersecurity and privacy are continuing to play larger and larger roles. Privacy law and management is the core legal course on the privacy side. It's a survey of focused on the US laws, but also including the European General Data Protection Regulation, all of the laws that you will encounter as a privacy and cybersecurity professional outside of the criminal side, which is what I introduce and what Jeff goes into. Privacy law and management. It's focused on it from an operational perspective. So it's how do you create a program, a privacy program, as a large national, or in some cases multinational corporation that's dealing with overlapping and sometimes conflicting regulations. That course, I co-created it, but it's with a really talented professional who literally got in on the ground floor, created nationwide's privacy program as the first major privacy law came out, HIPAA. He said it was going to be a project that he would do, and it became his career. He's also was involved in founding the major industry organization, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and as a result of that relationship, Kirk Harith is his name. He got our program recognized by IAPP as one of about 30 in the US and Canada that participate in the Weston Scholar Program. And so every year, one student from either this program or our law student program is selected to receive that award. It's recognized nationally, comes with $1,000 stipend and 3 free certifications. And the IAPP certifications are the major industry certifications. And that is roughly what privacy law and management tracks is the major, the core CIPP, Certified Information Privacy Professional certification. Then HIPAA and privacy. HIPAA is the healthcare law in the United States. It is that first law that launched Kirk's career, and it still is the most extensive single privacy law. And so by learning HIPAA and privacy in depth, you'll encounter a number of roles, but even if you're not in a role where healthcare law applies, by understanding HIPAA and privacy, you'll really be able to navigate any major privacy law. We talked about cyber law in detail already, and then the technical capstone, as I mentioned, rounds off the technical side. Now, throughout the program, we try to prepare you to take industry certifications. I already mentioned the CIPP. Technical capstone roughly maps to the Certified Ethical Hacker certification. And this is important because what we give you is a much more in-depth knowledge base that will follow you throughout your career, whatever role you're in. But to get that first job, if you're transitioning, it's really essential to get an industry credential because those certifications are sometimes they're required. Keep mentioning that conversation I had with the Goodyear folks. It's one of the things he requires on the privacy side is a CIPP, US or Europe. And on the technical side, things like Certified Ethical Hacker, they just demonstrate, look, you've got a core knowledge base that maps to something that that the industry understands and recognizes as a specific core area. And then the rest of this really fleshes that out and gives you a depth that you can use throughout your career. So with that, if there are questions about the curriculum itself, again, feel free to raise your hand or jump in. In the meantime, I'm going to hand it off to Julie, and she'll tell you about how to apply.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Jeff. That was a wonderful presentation. So if you are feeling at all motivated, hopefully, to apply to this program and continue your path down this this new and exciting industry, not new, but fastly growing industry. Yeah, thank you. Then please consider applying for our fall 2022 cohort, which begins the week of August 22nd. The great news is you still have plenty of time to apply. The deadline for the fall 2022 cohort is August 1st. As you can see here on this slide, we have detailed what is required for the application. It's quite simple compared to other programs you might be looking for. And I'd be more than happy to meet with you. In fact, I encourage, if we haven't already, for you to reach out to myself or Brian to talk about this program and see if it is a right fit for you before you go down the application process. That's what we're here for, and we really value and encourage you to have those conversations. So just again, as a reminder, application deadline for fall is August 1st, and the session starts the week of August 22nd. Brian, if you go to the next slide, I believe our contact information or my contact information is there. Yeah, and so that email address right there actually goes to both Brian and I. So if you have questions, even for Jeff, you can email, and Brian and I will make sure that we get those questions to Jeff if you didn't want to ask in front of everyone, or if you have more personal questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. like I said, that is our favorite part of this, is talking with you and making sure that this program is the right fit for you. That's all I have on our end. Brian or Jeff, is there anything else you'd like to add before we let our guests get on with their day?
Just want to thank Jeff again for taking the time. And as Julie mentioned, we're always happy to answer questions. Julie's sort of the front line, but she'll pass you off to me, and I can talk to you more about the substance and other things. So thanks, Julie. Thanks, Jeff.
Absolutely.
And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you both. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Take care.